Good morning friends. Today we are going to discuss the topic cell cycle. So this is one of the important topics in your studies, as well as you need to know about a cell cycle because we are all living organisms. So in lower classes you would have learned about the basic differences between the living and the non-living matter. So what is the basic difference or the most important difference that you see between the living organism and the non-living matter is the reproduction. So the ability to reproduce is a peculiar characteristic feature of the living organisms, and that happens as a result of the cell divisions, and cell divisions are a result of cell cycle. So today we are going to learn about this wonderful fact of cell cycle. So how can you define a cell cycle? A cell cycle can be defined as a series of events that happens before the cell is ready to divide, or in fact you can call it as the number of steps involved inside the cell that it happens for the preparation of the cell to divide. So this cell cycle can be divided into two major phases, that is the interphase and the mitotic phase. So interphase, which is the longest phase of a cell cycle, it takes almost 90 hours for the whole cell cycle to be completed, and out of this 90 hours, nearly 89 hours is taken up by the interphase, which is the first phase of the cell cycle. So that is why we always call it as the longest phase of the cell cycle. Now when you talk about the interphase, it is divided into three sub-phases: the G1 phase, the S phase and the G2 phase. And then comes the mitotic phase of the cell cycle. So throughout this session, we are going to define one by one these different phases of the cell cycle. So first phase, which is the interphase. The interphase, as I already told you, it is the longest phase of the cell cycle. Now in this phase, the cell is actually preparing to divide into two daughter nuclei or two daughter cells. So what all happens in this particular interphase? There are sub-phases, as I told you, but the interphase is actually called as the resting phase of the cell cycle. Now this resting doesn't mean that the cell is in a whole resting mode. No. The only thing is that it is not dividing in the interphase. But this rest phase, during this rest phase, the cells are metabolically active. It is during the interphase that the cells prepare the DNA, or the DNA replication happens there, the protein synthesis happens there, the preparation of mRNA, tRNA, rRNA, all those components which are required for the cell division is prepared during the interphase. So there comes the three different sub-phases of the interphase. The first one is the G1 phase. So the G refers to gap or growth. So first gap, that is G1. The first gap is actually present, or it is the phase which is present between the previous mitotic division and the synthesis phase, or the S phase of the interphase. Now when I say about the mitotic division, that represents the daughter cell which is formed as a result of cell cycle already. So now we have two daughter cells. Now these two daughter cells are entering into the G1 phase, where they are actually doing the processes of protein synthesis, and there are some organelles which are formed, and you can see as the proteins are synthesized and as the new organelles are formed, the cytoplasm of the cell increases. Okay, so this is the first gap phase. And next comes the S phase, which is the most important phase of a cell cycle, because the DNA replication, the major component of life or the major component of genetics, the DNA is prepared or replicated in the synthesis phase or S phase. That is why this phase is called as synthesis phase. S stands for synthesis. Now this is where the DNA replication takes place, and the proteins which are associated with the DNA are also synthesized in the S phase. Now this synthesis phase is lying between the G1 phase and the G2 phase. Now moving on to the next phase, which is G2 phase. The G2 phase is actually between the S phase and the next mitotic cell division or the mitotic phase of this particular cell cycle. So in the G2 phase, again it is a growth phase, and here the cell is completely full, or the cell is completely grown up stuffed with all the components that is ready to become into two different daughter cells. So all the components which are now to be divided into two daughter cells are included in a single cell in the G2 phase. So that means the cell is now ready for the division. Now this one stands between the DNA replication and the onset of the mitosis. Now here the cell synthesizes maximum proteins which are necessary for the cell division also. Now moving on to the next important phase, which is mitosis. Mitosis is a real cell division phase. Now as I told you, mitosis is the second phase of the cell cycle after the interphase. So it is in the mitosis that the cell is actually replicating or dividing into two. So the parent cell, the mother cell, is going to divide into two daughter cells by the end of the mitotic phase. So what are these processes happening in a mitosis? So before going into the processes, how long will it take for mitosis to take place? I told you earlier that the whole cell cycle in a normal human cell takes nearly 90 hours. And the interphase, which is the longest phase, takes up about 89 hours. So the remaining maximum 1 hour only is taken up by the mitosis, or that's the only time where the cell divides into two. Now, the process of mitosis takes place in two types or in two subdivisions, subphases, that is the karyokinesis and the cytokinesis. Karyon means nucleus. So kinesis means division. So what is karyokinesis? Karyokinesis simply means the division of nucleus. And cytokinesis, cyto means cell, kinesis again division. So cytokinesis means the division of the cell. So followed by karyokinesis, the cytokinesis takes place to complete the cell division. Now in mitosis, the basic processes that happen in mitosis can be divided into 4 stages, which is prophase, metaphase, anaphase and telophase. The first phase, prophase, is where the chromatin threads now condenses to form the chromatids or the chromosomes. Okay, and the nuclear envelope or the nuclear membrane starts disappearing. They start disintegrating in the prophase phase. And next one is the metaphase. Metaphase, the spindle fibers attached to the kinetochore, the central kinetochore of the chromosomes, and they arrange the chromosomes in the equatorial plane of the cell, or the meta, that is the halfway plate. And then moving on to the anaphase, as you see, the spindle fibers are now pulling the chromosomes, pulling the sister chromatids towards the opposite poles. So there you can see they are moving on to the opposite. Ana means opposite. So they pulled out towards the opposite poles. And the last phase, which is the telophase, you can see that the nuclear membrane or the nuclear envelope is reappearing, and the entire 2 sets of chromosomes are almost separated into 2 different nuclei. So already the karyokinesis have taken place. So during the telophase, you can see that the karyokinesis has taken place. Now after telophase, the cell divides, the single cell divides into 2 daughter cells, and each of these 2 daughter cells carry their own set of chromosomes, which is a copy of their parent cell. This is what happens in the mitosis, and this complete process from the interphase, the G1 phase of the interphase, till the end of mitosis marked by the cytokinesis is what is called as the cell cycle. So if I could repeat, the cell cycle is a series of events that takes place in a cell to undergo a cell division to produce its own replica or a copy. So there are 2 phases in a cell cycle, which is the interphase and the mitosis. Interphase is composed of 3 phases, which is the G1 phase and S phase and G2 phase. where these three phases are where the cell prepares the content for division or prepares the components for dividing or giving it to two different cells. And the second phase, the mitosis, is where the cell actually divides into two daughter cells, where you could see the karyokinesis as well as the cytokinesis. So this marks the end of cell cycle, and if you have any doubt, contact me later. Thank you.